Welcome back. It's been an awful long time since the last time I put up a video here, which is mostly my fault, so I probably better do a quick recap of what it is we're actually doing. This is back in the Alpha system after our horrific failure to save the Earth on the losing path. We are back at the mission where Blair chooses to fly sober or drunk, and this time he's sober, though I'm not. The thread was curious as to whether or not it was anywhere near as hard to fly this mission with the player drunk as it is with the character drunk, so I was convinced to experiment. The answer, I will tell you straight off, is no, not even close. I wasn't that drunk doing this, but it was mostly my decision making rather than my actual flying that was impaired. You might have noticed by now that I've forgotten to do something pretty important at this point, and I don't remember until reminded by the game. If you haven't worked out what that is, you're about to be reminded.
I am ready to engage.
Attack my target.
Yep, forgot to tell Hobbs to attack.
I have failed my race. I have dispatched an enemy.
And that, while it was the most obvious mistake I made, was far from the only one. There's a whole lot of questionable decision making in this first section of the video. But in terms of actual difficulty, it's not even close to being as hard as it is when it was drunk. When Blair was drunk, I was playing this on Veteran and I was completely ineffective. I'm playing this on Nightmare and I don't have any trouble killing enemies like I did then. In fact, I actually had too much success. The Sheffield, the destroyer you can just see there, has AI programmed here to destroy that Corvette you saw it firing at and then jump out, like so. But the position of the Corvette is fixed. It always jumps in at the same point, and it always jumps in once you kill the other three. And the position of the Sheffield is fixed when you arrive at the nav point and it travels at the same speed. So the relative position of the Sheffield and the Corvette, obviously enough, depends on how long you take to destroy the first three Corvettes. And the first times I did this while Blair was sober, I was killing the Corvettes way too fast, and therefore the fourth Corvette would jump in out of range of the Sheffield, which would therefore take much longer to kill it and jump out, and the Vector would have longer to destroy the Sheffield. And that's a bit of a problem because the arrow is not very good at distracting Vectors from attacking a cap ship, since you can't really keep up fire against the turreted ship very long before your fighters' shields give out. Now, you don't actually have to save the Sheffield to pass this mission, but if you don't, then it won't be alive in subsequent missions, so as far as I'm concerned, it's not an optional extra. The Sheffield has to survive. So that led to a lot of restarts until I figured out that the solution was just to kill the Corvettes more slowly. Anyway, that brings us on to these Darkits, which are slightly odd. They're not the only fighters that do it, but they all universally go after Hobbs. In some ways it's a good thing because there's 8 of them, and 8 Darkits after you would be a bit of a pain, but it's also quite frustrating in as much as I've said before, it's very hard to hit a Darkit that's not actually attacking you, because the only time you can reliably hit one is when it's not dodging, that is when it's going head to head with you and trying to kill you. It's much more difficult to hit one that's lining up on another fighter because they tend to move around a bit as the other fighter dodges. Though not all the time. This one is currently being cooperative, or it was briefly there. So the basic way that fight goes is you try and put enough shots into the rear armour of a Darkit that it decides to break off from attacking Hobbs and go after you instead, at which point it becomes much easier to kill. And hope that Hobbs doesn't take too much damage as you peel them off one by one.
What's your status?
Only minor damage to report, Colonel.
Not that it really matters. Hobbs does terribly in this fight. and almost always eject at some point during this wave, no matter how little damage you had when this wave started. Now, you've seen me engage with Actops and Pactons a lot of times before, and I don't really have anything new to say about this wave that I haven't said before. So, instead of talking a bit more about how you fight Actops by hanging around in the little blind spot just to be able to fight it where the turret never seems to hit you, I think I'll talk about the problems the Wing Commander universe has with continuity, which has been an occasional topic of conversation in the thread. The basic problem the universe has is that, well, it's got two major ones. The first one is that it was kind of started 3 different times. There's Wing Commander 1, of course, and then there was also the Academy animated series and the movie. Now, with a bit of effort you can generally stitch 2 of them together with only a few bugs, but all 3 is severely pushing it. There's a few issues. One of them is where all of the recurring characters meet each other. Yeah, I mentioned earlier that Hobbs tends to eject in this sequence. That's where he did it this time. That means that now I'm facing the 5-on-1 and will be facing 5 to 6-on-1 for most of the rest of the mission. This means there's going to be an awful lot of incoming enemy fire in the near future. And tactically I have to react to that by using much shorter bursts of fire at the enemy. Basically it's sort of empty the gun banks, loop around, recharge, dodge and come back. How I talked about in the previous mission, the Excalibur that makes you fly and how you ought to fly in practically everything else when you're badly outnumbered. Unfortunately that was a bit too much to think about, along with flying while drunk, so it didn't really happen. And as a result of which my amount of damage will steadily mount over the next few minutes. Anyway, back to continuity. Like I was saying, the various recurring characters meet each other at various different times in various different places depending on what you ask, so Academy animated series and, for that matter, the Wing Commander 1 strategy guide both have Blair and Maniac meet each other at the Academy, whereas in Wing Commander 1 they meet each other on the Tiger's Claw. And it's largely similar with the rest of the other recurring characters. For example, Wing Commander 1 and Academy both have Colwyn in command of the Tiger's Claw, but in the movie he's in his free action role overseeing the Plains of Earth. You have similar problems with a few other details. For example, the whole point of Wing Commander Academy is that the cadets in the senior Academy wing are being deployed to the Tiger's Claw as a final shakedown part of their training. But in Wing Commander 1, Blair says that as part of his academy, conveyed himself on the Formidable, which is an X-class destroyer rather than the Claw. I guess you could have done both, but it would be rather odd that you were bouncing around different ships during your training. But most of this is just like single references and so on. There's not much that's fundamental to the universe that changes between any of them. You can argue a bit about how jump transits work, except that how the physics of the Wing Commander universe works is also not fundamental to it, really. I mean, in Academy, jump travel takes a certain amount of time, whereas it's instantaneous in almost all the games. But physics has never been terribly relevant to Wing Commander unless it affects the story. So in Academy it affects the story because it allows Blair to do an introductory monologue in the sense of in a few minutes the Tiger's Claw will jump into the whatever system it was, I don't remember perfectly. Whereas it never really matters to the plot. The jump travel is instantaneous, other than, I guess, maybe in Wing Commander 4, which otherwise would have enormous trouble shoehorning its already overly tightly timetabled plot into the amount of time the game theoretically takes. It is on the other hand relevant that jump points are quite hard to find and navigate, and that jump transits are hazardous if you don't know exactly where the jump point is, but that's one of the few things that's incredibly consistent throughout the Wing Commander universe. It shows up in Wing Commander 2 where recorded double jumping is regarded as insanely dangerous. It shows up in Academy where Tolwyn sends a recon mission through a jump point before turning the Tiger's Claw through because he's not quite sure how to hit the jump and get to the right place. And of course it happens in the movie, which is part of where all of the daftness about the Pilgrims comes from. Now while the bitten by a radioactive Navi computer end of the Pilgrim Alliance is quite stupid, the overall idea that there will be a conflict between humanity's first colonists and the rest of the species is not particularly original. I mean, Asimov did it in his Robots Empire Foundation universe, and several authors have followed suit since. But the reason they did that is because it's a good idea. And in that sense, the Pilgrim Alliance was a much more plausible non-confederation human nation than some of the subsequent ones. Just going back to the game for a bit, you'll have noticed that my armour has now been fairly whittled down over a series of mistakes, and just to top that off, whoops. So yeah, that was basically as far as I tended to get trying to buy the mission drunk. I wouldn't necessarily collide, but normally I'd run into a missile or two at that point. I never got... I think occasionally I did manage to get to the second wave of Drouthy, but never beyond that. Still, that's Nightmare, and if you remember how completely useless I was on Veteran when Blair was drunk, I think we can safely say that it's easier to play that mission when actually drunk than to do so with Blair drunk. Just to show that I can actually do this mission on Nightmare, this is game sober, me sober, and I just skipped ahead to where I got to previously, so that were the last two Drouthy of the first wave, and this is the second wave of Drouthy now. And you'll see that the missile counter is beginning to make itself noticed. I had 33 missiles that were fired at me before we got to the start point here, and you'll see the number slowly increasing throughout the rest of the video. Since this is edited highlights still, rather than a full video, the number will jump quite frequently, but I'm sure you can all handle that. And you'll see that I did comment that being sober didn't necessarily improve my flying skill, and you'll notice there that that was indeed the case, because once again I collided with the Drouthy. But what it does do is improve my tactics, and you'll see I'm breaking away a lot more and using missiles slightly more intelligently, though that guy would just not get hit by a missile. And so I had a full set of armour, more or less intact, and therefore when I collided with a Drouthy, the result was a dead Drouthy and an only slightly dead arrow, rather than dead Drouthy and a dead arrow. Obviously, having just commented that I had a full set of armour, the inevitable consequence was that I then go and lose all of that armour. This fight is the hardest one, not just because of the Drouthy's missiles, but also because the Drouthy's got the best balance of speed and firepower to better than arrow. It actually can get a bead on you, and those guns do hurt arrows with paper thin shields. Going back to Wing Commander continuity for a bit, last I was talking about that, I brought up the Pilgrim Alliance and how humanity is not entirely united. And in fact that is what I regard as the big continuity problem between the odd and even numbered Wing Commanders and then the various spin-off products are on one side or the other is whether or not humanity and, for that matter, the Kilrathi are cohesive entities, whether it's a war between two races or two governments. On one side you've got Wing Commander 1 and Wing Commander 3, and the majority of Academy, which have the us or them thing. Paladin mentions the idea that we might have to kill all the Kilrathi in order to end the war in Wing Commander 1, and of course that's very much the theme of Wing Commander 3, as I talked about in the Losing Ending video. It's set up as an us or them scenario, whereas Wing Commanders 2 and 4 both show humanity as much less united and the Kilrathi as much less united. You've got the Kilrathi rebellions on Gorkar in Wing Commander 2, and you've got books like Complete Action based on Wing Commander 2 where Baron Jakarga is distinctly less loyal to the Empire than might be expected of a Kilrathi in Wing Commander 3, and then you've got Khazra and Rakath clearly not getting on with each other in secret operations. And similarly on the human side you have the Mandarins, and in Wing Commander 4 the Terrans are not even almost united, as you will see when I finally get around to that game. But the basic point is that the even number of Wing Commander games are a much more complicated universe. It's not the Terrans and the Kilrathi, it's very much a war between the Terran Confederation and the Empire of Kilrar, and they don't correlate perfectly with species. And that lack of unity is what suggests that some form of negotiated peace settlement would theoretically be possible, not necessarily between the present government, but there are Terrans and Kilrathi who, if not exactly pacifistic, are at least more opposed to their own government than they are to the other side. Whereas in the odd-numbered games, the war is presented as, if not one of complete extermination, then at least destruction of one of the other sides as a galactic power. That level of extra nuance, which is present in some of the games and related products and not others, can in part be attributed to Chris Roberts, or rather to a lack of Chris Roberts. He didn't particularly care much for the Wing Commander 2 plot, and in many ways you can see Wing Commander 3, which he was much more heavily involved with than Wing Commander 2, is a return to a lot of Wing Commander 1 values. A theme to which I will return in later videos. Whether or not the Chris Roberts vision is the one that's preferable for Wing Commander is a bit of an open question. I have a personal preference for the Wing Commander 2, Wing Commander 4 style of story, but I can recognise the merit in Wing Commander 3's version as well. Wing Commanders 2 and 4 are in large part event-driven storylines. I'll stick to using Wing 2 as an example since I've not played 4 yet. And in Vengeance of Kilrathi, the storyline is mostly about the Trust and Treachery plot. It's about the traitor on Concordia, and then later problems with the Mandarins and so on, and Rakath having his own issues with Khazra on the Kilrathi side. Whereas Wing Commander 3 is all about individual characters. It's a very character-driven story. It's about how each of them reacts to the war.
Mission objectives accomplished.
Goes on. You have Flint and her wanting to prove herself, live up to her father's name. You have Flash and his growing into a combat pilot's role. And you have Vagabond, Hobbs and Cobra, as each of them try and come to terms with their respective pasts and presents. And that's not inferior in my opinion. The fact that events in the Wing Commander 3 storyline are primarily there as things for the characters to react to does not necessarily make it worse than Wing Commander 4 or Wing Commander 2. Though in terms of personal preference, my favourite plot is 4. Anyway, back to the action briefly. We have a bunch of Straka here. This is... Straka are largely joke enemies, in the sense that they don't have much firepower, they don't have many hit points. But when it's 4-on-1 like this, you do have to respect them a bit, especially in an arrow, and especially in a damaged arrow. They can do some damage. It took me a while to realise that, so I took some damage at the start, until I got settled into a pattern of finding the Straka that's just decloaking and coming at you and giving it a few blasts and then turning away and looking for the next one. And that takes quite a long time to bear fruit, but when it does, the enemy goes down pretty quickly. It's Wing Commander 3 in microcosm in many ways. If you've got the patience, you can beat the game. I have said that before, but the difference this time is that as well as requiring patience, it is also an awful lot of fun. I'm not sure how well that's come through in the highlights, but to actually convey how the whole thing had gone, it would have taken about 10 minutes of video, and it's quite repetitive to watch, but it's quite a lot of fun to do, so I didn't really want to bore you with it particularly. I thought that this video was long enough, 25 minutes as it was. It's certainly much more entertaining than fighting a bunch more Vaktar. Fortunately, this is the last set of Vaktar for this mission. Unfortunately, there'll be a whole ton more of them. At least for the majority of the remainder of the game, we should be in an Excalibur, and they take much less time then. Admittedly, not all of the remainder of the game. And those of you who attempted to vote for Hellcat over an Excalibur will have, I think, one more chance to do that. I may be wrong, you may have missed your last chance to do it. We shall see. Certainly there was at least one more mission where the Excalibur is an optional fighter, but I'm not sure if every other fighter is available, or it's just the heavies. You'll have seen that the missile count has got stupid now. 86 is the final number, there will be no more missiles. But, well, no more enemy missiles, there will be more friendly missiles as we have a pair of arrows at the final nav point that will be throwing missiles into the mix. It really is a ridiculous number, but I suppose if you put that to somebody from Origin, there's a few things they could say in response. They could point out that I'm still alive, so clearly it wasn't that ridiculous. And they could also point out that given that I am playing on Nightmare, I should probably expect a lot of enemy firepower to be coming my way. That somewhat gets into the topic of how you choose to design your ultra difficulty level. Now, I don't know if I've brought this topic up before in a video, but I quite like it, so I'm not going to feel too ashamed about bringing it up again if I have. Wing Commander 3 does Nightmare by making the enemy fighters better. It gives the Kilrathi more afterburners, more missiles, doesn't require them to have a missile lock before firing in some cases. And by doing all of those things, it constrains player's actions and makes him fly much more defensively than he otherwise would if he doesn't want to die. Wing Commander Standoff and the other games of that ilk, but I was referring to Standoff in particular because it was the one I was playing, are different in that the primary thing they do on Nightmare is making the player's ship worse. They halve the durability, and I'm not sure if they also decrease your relative firepower or if that's just Rookie that doubles it in the Vision engine. But either way, it's making you worse rather than them better. That has a distinct effect in as much as a lot of the time there, the best defense is actually a good offense, because by destroying enemy fighters as rapidly as possible, and your ability to do that is not decreased by the difficulty setting, or at least not by a great amount, you can achieve a measure of safety without having to resort to defensive tactics, which are... So I'm a bit conflicted about actually saying they're more boring, because the defensive challenge in a mission like this is actually really good fun. But when it goes on for an hour, as this mission does on Nightmare, and to be honest, it's not that much shorter on Crazy though on lower difficulty levels than Ace, it does probably dip below half an hour. It does begin to wear on you a bit, and the challenge is not so much the tactics involved as having the patience and the concentration span not to make a fatal mistake. And given that we're in an arrow and therefore have thin armour and shielding, almost any mistake has the potential to be fatal. That's not true. You're allowed one, basically, in an arrow. I had the one, I collided with that Jalfi, I haven't made anything else particularly serious. So, mission accomplished. Well, okay, I've had the mission accomplished. already, but I could actually still fail. Once these two Swordback are down, that's it. And I'm not entirely sure I approve of that particular style of difficulty, since most of what it leads to is a large amount of frustration. And that sort of just do it right, damn it, frustration is a type I'm quite familiar enough with due to archery. Anyway, at length, that's that.
Need clearance, TCS Victory.
Tied the bullet that time, sir. You're cleared to land.
Thanks for watching, I've been Alanin, this has been Wing Commander 3 Heart of the Tiger, and join me next time, which will hopefully come sooner than it did this time.